Today's topic is about phase, how phase interacts with your speakers.
This is a recording of a test track to see how phase alignment impacts your sound quality of recordings. We're going to start off with the recording here, and we're in Cakewalk, which is an digital audio workstation. And with this, we can show you and somewhat control how phase alignment impacts sound quality. But first, let's start by panning. Let's show you what that exactly means. Panning is when the singer is panned to the left of the soundstage. So when you hear a singer or a guitar or something coming from the left to the right, this is how they do it. This is one of the ways they do it. Now let's pan to the right. She's now panned to the right, as you can hear. Now regarding phase is controlled in this digital audio workstation here. In, out of phase, in phase. And why is that important? It's important because there's a lot of layers in here, and all of these layers need to be in phase. If they're not in phase, it'll sound either flanged sounding, kind of funny, sound recessed, or it may also alter the frequency response. So this is what we're dealing with, and so now we're going to talk about how your speakers need to be in phase to provide proper alignment of these tracks, the vocals, and the overall audio experience.
But speaking of phase, as I showed you in the previous slide, phase is important when recordings are made. It determines the placement of the singers, soloists, instruments in the left and right soundstage, also forward and back. So when people talk about the depth of a recording, they're basically talking about phase and amplitude. Amplitude is the sound's loudness or softness. Panning is also involved, where they go left or right, but phase is important as well. Now, what is phase? It involves the timing between instruments, singers, and indeed in your speakers. Now, ideally, when the recording comes out, the engineers set the phase the way they want it. The singers and instruments are placed where they need to be. Their amplitude or their prominence in the recording has already been determined. Our goal is to make sure that when it comes out of our speakers, or your speakers for that matter, everything's in phase, everything's the way the engineer intended it to be, so you get to hear the music the way they wanted you to hear it. Now, what can mess up phase? Well, as we know, the most common way is to connect your speaker wires backwards. One is set to right and left, one is set to left and right, or positive and negative, and they're out of phase, kills the bass, kills the mid-range, and the treble is kind of weird sounding. But let's just say that you've got that hooked up correctly, and it still sounds kind of strange, kind of indistinctive in the mid-range. The treble's wandering back and forth a little bit, perhaps. The instruments aren't placed where they need to be. They sound kind of fuzzy, indistinct. There should be vocals off to the left the way you heard it in your headphones, but yet in your speakers you're not hearing that as clearly. There's a possibility your speakers have phase problems. Now, what causes that? Well, the main cause is distances between the speakers. Now, this reproduces the woofer reproduces the bass, mid-range. This is the horn, reproduces the upper mid-range and the treble. Now, the placement of these two between each other has to be at a certain distance. For example, almost knocked over my stage here. For example, if you move this, say, up too high, the phase will be changed. The reference between the time that this horn gets to your ears and the time that this gets to your ears as well is misaligned. Alignment is important. So the difference between the center of this driver and the center of this driver has to be determined at the frequency crossover point. As we discussed before in a previous video, we're looking at anywhere from 6.5 to 8 inches or so. So what we do then is we put the horn in a certain location, we move it forward and back. We also go up and down. So until we get a frequency response that we measure that is accurate without any dips or phase anomalies. Now, who cares about a phase anomaly? Well, when things are out of phase, it changes their frequency response. So you're not getting a flat output out of your speakers. So it's very important that phasing is done correctly in your speakers. So now, what else influences phase besides distance, front and back, the alignment? Notice this is aligned with the front of the baffle. What also influences it is the crossover. So a first order crossover, second order crossover, third and fourth order crossover have different phase alignments. We'll discuss that again in another video. We kind of went over the crossover points and the steepness of the curves. It all interacts. So to sum it all up, phase influences frequency response and instrument placement. With our little band here of trolls, let's say that you're out of phase, the recording's in phase, your speakers are out of phase. So what happens is it skews the soundstage. So instead of them being placed straight on, they become distorted. So now this little guy here is the closest to you, but it's not the lead singer. That's because the phase is misaligned. The timing's important. So as we move this back here in alignment, the lead singer here is towards you. This little guy here is away from you, as is this guy, and this guy's way out in the back. I imagine he probably plays drums in another life. But the thing is as the speaker's phase is shifting between drivers, so let's say that part of the mid-range is coming from here and part of it is coming from here, they need to be in alignment. Otherwise, what happens is, as we go from, say, a singer with a bass voice to, say, a soprano or an alto, as the frequency changes here, their alignment in the musical soundstage becomes misaligned. So suddenly, instead of being way off to the right, this little guy here is off the soundstage or way off. So we can't have that. So phase alignment ensures that the soundstage is lined up the way the recording engineer wanted it to be, and therefore you're getting an accurate representation of the recording.